Have you ever read Section 101 of the Doctrine and Covenants? No, not that one. The original one. Up until the printing of 1876, this was Section 101. The article on marriage stated,
Insomuch as this Church of Christ has been reproached with the crime of fornication and polygamy, we declare that we believe that one man should have one wife, and one woman but one husband, except in the case of death, when either is at liberty to marry again.
The LDS Church was denying, in its scriptures, that it practiced polygamy. It was a denial they made over and over. Joseph Smith said the year he died,
What a thing it is for a man to be accused of committing adultery and having 7 wives when I can only find one. I am the same man and as innocent as I was 14 years ago, and I can prove them all perjurers.
The LDS Church now admits they were practicing polygamy as early as the 1830s, but they would deny it publicly until 1852. In the meantime, Section 101 of the Doctrine and Covenants was used to defend them against people saying otherwise. In 1850, apostle and future prophet John Taylor was called to answer rumors that the LDS were practicing polygamy. He responded,
We are accused here of polygamy, and actions the most indelicate, obscene, and disgusting, such that none but a corrupt and depraved heart could have contrived. These things are too outrageous to admit of belief. I shall content myself by reading our views of chastity and marriage from a work published by us, containing some of the articles of our faith. Inasmuch as this Church of Jesus Christ has been reproached with the crime of fornication and polygamy, we declare that we believe that one man should have one wife, and one woman but one husband, except in case of death, when either is at liberty to marry again.
In 1852, the Mormon Church would finally admit in Utah to polygamy. But the article on marriage would continue to appear as Section 101 in printings of the Doctrine and Covenants in 1854, 1866, and 1869. With the 1876 edition, the whole section simply disappeared. What had been Section 97 became the new Section 101. Section 132, that explicitly taught polygamy, would then appear for the first time, 33 years after its given date, and over 40 years after Joseph Smith took his first plural wife. There is something truly magical about how the LDS scriptures appear and disappear. It goes back to the Book of Mormon itself. The traditional view put forth by the church is that Joseph Smith translated the characters from the golden plates, as any other translator would. But as the internet has made eyewitness testimonies much easier to access, they now admit this was not the case.
According to these accounts, Joseph placed either the interpreter's or the seer stone in a hat, pressed his face into the hat to block out extraneous light, and read aloud the English words that appeared on the instrument.
Eyewitnesses clearly defined this as the norm and said the plates were covered with a cloth during translation. Sometimes they were not even present in the room. In 2015, the church released the first pictures of Joseph Smith's seer stone. Martin Harris described it.
Joseph had a stone which was dug from the well of Mason Chase, 24 feet from the surface. In this stone he could see many things to my certain knowledge. It was by means of this stone he first discovered these plates. In the first place he told me of this stone and proposed to bind it on his eyes and run a race with me in the woods. Joseph had had this stone for some time. There was a company there in that neighborhood who were digging for money, supposed to have been hidden by the ancients. Of this company were old Mr. Stowell, I think his name was Josiah, also old Mr. Beeman, also Samuel Lawrence, George Proper, Joseph Smith, Jr., and his father, and his brother Hiram Smith. They dug for money in Palmyra, Manchester, also in Pennsylvania and other places. When Joseph found this stone, there was a company digging in Harmony, Pennsylvania, And they took Joseph to look in the stone for them, and he did so for a while. And then he told them the enchantment was so strong that he could not see, and they gave it up.
Such peepstones were not uncommon among the early LDS.
Joseph and Emma Smith moved back to New York. A man named Hiram Page lived there. He was a member of the church. He had a stone that he said helped him receive revelations for the church. Many church members believed Hiram Page, including Oliver Cowdery. Some people thought Hiram Page was a prophet. Oliver asked Joseph about Hiram Page. Joseph prayed, and Jesus gave him a revelation. Jesus said that only one man could receive revelations for the entire church. That man was the prophet Joseph Smith. Jesus said that Oliver and others could receive revelations for themselves, but not for the entire church. Oliver believed Joseph. He knew that Hiram Page's revelations were wrong. Jesus told Oliver to talk to Hiram Page. Oliver told him that the revelations he received through the stone were not from God. Oliver said that Satan had tricked Hiram Page. Hiram listened to Oliver and repented. Today, only the president of the church receives revelations for the whole church. He is a prophet of God. Members of the church should obey the prophet.
So apparently, the revelations through Hiram Page's peepstone were from the devil, but Joseph's were from God. The use of a peepstone was not the only thing magical about the Book of Mormon translation. When Martin Harris, the financial backer of the project, took the first 116 pages of the manuscript home to appease his wife, she refused to return them. Rather than retranslate the records of Lehi, Smith said God gave him a new revelation in which the record of Lehi simply disappears and the record of Nephi appears. Even after the Book of Mormon was published, magical things took place. Thousands of changes appeared. Most were small, but some were substantive and reflected changes in LDS theology, while others corrected inconsistencies in the original Book of Mormon timeline. Joseph used a different means in translating the Book of Abraham, but once again it was magical. When a traveling exhibit of Egyptian antiquities came to Kirtland, Smith announced that the papyri were actually written by Abraham by his own hand on papyrus. The church purchased the papyri, and Smith set about translating them into the Book of Abraham.
Some evidence suggests that Joseph studied the characters on the Egyptian papyri and attempted to learn the Egyptian language. His history reports that in July 1835, he was, quote, continually engaged in translating an alphabet to the Book of Abraham and arranging a grammar of the Egyptian language as practiced by the ancients. Now, this grammar, as it was called, consisted of columns of hieroglyphic characters, followed by English translations recorded in a large notebook by Joseph's scribe, William W. Phelps. Another manuscript, written by Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery, has Egyptian characters followed by explanations.
The papyri stayed with Emma after Joseph's death, but when Emma died, they were sold and presumed lost in the Great Chicago Fire. In spite of this, the facsimiles remained and were examined by several Egyptologists in 1912. They agreed that they were very common scenes in Egyptian papyri. Facsimile 3 was of the judgment seat of Osiris. Facsimile 2 was a common disc called a hypocephalus that was placed under a mummy's head. Facsimile 1 was the very common image of a dead person laid on a lion couch, but the head of Anubis had been changed to the head of a man. The facsimiles led them to conclude that it was part of the Book of Breathings from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and that it was written long after the time of Abraham. The LDS responded that if the actual papyri still existed, they would prove the critics wrong. Unfortunately, they simply weren't available. All that changed in 1967, when parts of the papyri were found in the Metropolitan Museum in New York and given to the LDS Church. The church was ecstatic. No one in America knew how to read hieroglyphics when Joseph produced the Book of Abraham. Now that Smith's translation could be validated, the church was certain this would prove his authenticity as a prophet. BYU professor Hugh Nibley spent a year learning to read hieroglyphics. But when he and other scholars read the papyri, they found out they really were the Book of Breathings from the Egyptian Book of the Dead. The parts of Facsimile 1 that the scholars in 1912 said were wrong happened to be missing and were drawn in by a modern hand. Not only was all the text from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, but even the text around what became the basis of Facsimile 1. The response from the LDS Church has been that these papyri are not the actual basis of the Book of Abraham.
It is likely futile to assess Joseph's ability to translate papyri when we now have only a fraction of the papyri he had in his possession. Eyewitnesses spoke of a long roll or multiple rolls of papyrus. Since only fragments survive, it is likely that much of the papyri accessible to Joseph when he translated the Book of Abraham is not among these fragments.
The funny thing is that when we go back to Joseph Smith's Egyptian grammar, owned by the LDS Church, the characters come from the papyri rediscovered in 1967. Despite such difficulties, some claim that, like the Seer stone, the papyri were an instrument, not for translation but revelation. Others claim that since so many words came from single characters, they must have been some kind of mnemonic device.
The veracity and value of the Book of Abraham cannot be settled by scholarly debate concerning the book's translation and historicity. The book's status as Scripture lies in the eternal truths it teaches and the powerful spirit it conveys. The Book of Abraham imparts profound truths about the nature of God, His relationship to us as His children, and the purpose of this mortal life. The truth of the Book of Abraham is ultimately found through careful study of its teachings, sincere prayer, and the confirmation of the Spirit.
The Book of Commandments is another example of magical scriptures. Published in 1833, it was the predecessor of the Doctrine and Covenants. But the same revelations had thousands of changes when they were republished just 2 years later. One example is Book of Commandments, chapter 28. When it became chapter 27 of the Doctrine and Covenants, all of this was added. The LDS Church explains this by saying the Book of Commandments was incomplete.
All through the winter of 1832, the revelations were being prepared and were being typeset, and the printing began. Then on July 20th, 1833, several hundred vigilantes came to the printing office and started tearing it apart. When the dust had settled, a variety of people went through the pages that existed and compiled what they could. And so you'll notice that each Book of Commandments is slightly different because the pages were incomplete.
The problem is that this revelation was also given in the Evening and Morning Star months before the attack on the printing office. There it appeared identically to the Book of Commandments. But when the Evening and Morning Star was reprinted in 1835, it was changed to reflect the new version. One of the most radical changes in the LDS Scriptures in the 20th century was in 1921, when the lectures on faith, the doctrine part of the Doctrine and Covenants, were removed. Nearly 1/5 of the Doctrine and Covenants simply disappeared from the standard works. As in other cases, revelations from the 1830s that appeared to contradict later revelations simply disappeared. Of all Joseph Smith's changes to scriptures, none are more magical than the changes he made to the Bible itself. In some places, he added whole new sections to the Bible that were included in the Pearl of Great Price. In other sections, he changed the meaning of passages entirely. One striking set of changes is in the book of Exodus, where Smith changed 11 different verses. Everywhere that it said that God hardened Pharaoh's heart, Smith changed it to Pharaoh hardening his own heart. Not only is this contrary to every Hebrew manuscript in the world and every other translation of Exodus, but it is contrary to how the Apostle Paul used these texts in his epistle to the Romans. There he specifically refers to God hardening Pharaoh's heart. Disagreeing with Paul would not seem to have discouraged Smith. A few chapters earlier in Romans 4, Smith inserts the word not into verse 5, completely changing the meaning.
But to him that seeketh not to be justified by the law of works, but believeth on him who justifieth not the ungodly, his faith is counted for righteousness.
This reading is not supported by any of the thousands of Greek manuscripts of Paul's epistle to the Romans, nor by any of the thousands of translations into other languages, nor in any of the citations by men who were taught by the apostles. The simple fact is that Joseph Smith wasn't translating anything, but claiming to receive revelation contrary to the revelation given to Paul. The LDS scriptures are not really magical. They're simply a bad illusion. The Bible presents a radically different God and a radically different gospel. We implore you to watch a video we have prepared called An Earnest Plea to Latter-day Saints. Rather than seeking to make parts of the Bible disappear and make new things appear, we deal with the Word of God for what it really says. Jesus said that in spite of all the lies in the world, there is truth, and the truth will make us free.